The silent auction of souls. The wind that swept down from the hills above Ulaanbaatar carried the sharp scent of coal smoke and distant snow. Batgan Temujin stood at the edge of the Narantul market, watching the evening crowd thin, when the elder found him. The man was small and weathered, his deal the color of dried grass, his face lined like the steppe after a hard winter. He did not waste words. "The drum is gone," he said. "Our shaman's drum, the one that has spoken for 7 generations. They say it will be sold tonight in a place where money speaks louder than spirits. If it leaves the land will no longer know us." Temujin felt the weight of the statement settle in his chest. He had grown up hearing the old stories, how the drum's voice could call rain, calm storms, and bind the living to the ancestors. To lose it was not merely theft, it was a severing. "Where?" he asked. The elder pressed a folded scrap of paper into his hand, an address in the diplomatic quarter, a time, no name. That was all. By midnight Temujin had become someone else. He wore a dark suit that sat uneasily on his shoulders, the kind of clothing that allowed a man to move through certain rooms without being questioned. He had learned long ago that the most effective way to remain unseen was not to hide, but to belong just enough. The villa stood behind high walls and silent cameras. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and old wood. Soft music played. Men and women in tailored clothes spoke in low, careful voices. On a long table covered in black cloth lay objects that had once been sacred. A silver snuff bottle from the Qing court, a fragment of a Buddhist manuscript, a pair of carved horsehead fiddles. And at the center, resting on a stand of dark velvet, the drum. It was smaller than Temujin had imagined, its wooden frame darkened by decades of smoke and oil, the skin stretched tight and marked with faded symbols. Even in this sterile room, it seemed to hold a quiet breath of its own. He moved closer, studying the faces around the table. Collectors, middlemen. One woman with a European accent was already calculating shipping costs under her breath. Another man, older, kept touching the edge of the table as if steadying himself. Temujin's gaze returned to the older man. There was something wrong in the way he held himself, too rigid, too watchful. Not the posture of a buyer who had come to possess, but of someone who had already lost. During a brief lull, Temujin stepped beside him. "You brought it here," he said quietly, not a question. The man's eyes flicked toward him, then away. "I had no choice." "There is always a choice." The academic Temujin could see it now in the precise way he spoke, the faint ink stain on his cuff swallowed. "My daughter, a rare blood disorder. The treatment is in Switzerland. The hospital will not begin until the first payment is secured. I have spent 20 years studying these objects. I know their value better than most of the people in this room. I told myself one drum could save a life." Temujin looked at the instrument again. In the nomadic camps he had known as a boy, the drum was not an object. It was a voice. When it spoke, the ancestors listened. When it fell silent, the living began to forget who they were. "You understand what you have done," Temujin said. "I understand what I will lose if I do nothing." Around them, the auction was beginning. Numbers were spoken in 3 languages. The bids climbed with the calm certainty of people who had never had to choose between a child's life and a people's memory. Temujin felt the familiar stillness settle over him, the same quiet that came when he moved through the dark steppe at night, when the only sounds were the wind and his own breath. He stepped forward at the moment the bidding paused. "This piece is not for sale," he said, his voice carrying just far enough. "It was taken without consent from a community that still uses it. Under both Mongolian law and international convention, it cannot be exported." A ripple of irritation moved through the room. One of the organizers began to protest. Temujin did not raise his voice. He simply placed a small folder on the table, photographs, a statement from the elder, a copy of the relevant heritage protection clauses. He had prepared them in the hours before the gathering. The academic stared at the documents, as if they were a second diagnosis. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the woman with the European accent closed her catalog. "I will not touch it," she said. Others followed. The market, for all its secrecy, still preferred not to buy trouble that could follow them across borders. Temujin turned to the academic. "Come with me. There may be other ways to find the money. Legitimate ways. I know people who work with medical funds for rare diseases, but the drum returns tonight." The man hesitated, then nodded once, the fight gone out of him. They left the villa under a sky thick with stars. The elder was waiting near the river, as Temujin had arranged. When the drum was placed in his hands, the old man pressed his forehead to the skin for a long time and said nothing. Words were not required. Later, walking alone through the quiet streets, Temujin felt the city's noise return around him. He thought of the academic's daughter, of the hospital in Switzerland, of the thin line between desperation and theft. He had recovered the drum. He had not solved the deeper problem. Cultural heritage could be protected by law and by vigilance. Human need was harder to police. Both mattered. Both could destroy something irreplaceable if ignored. He paused on a bridge and looked down at the dark water. Somewhere far beyond the city lights, the steppe waited under the same stars. The drum would speak again. The ancestors would hear. And Temujin, who moved between worlds more easily than most, would continue to walk the narrow path between what must be preserved and what must be forgiven. The night wind carried no answers. Only the faint, familiar scent of the land that still, for now, remembered its own.